Hi everyone, Jill Mathis here with another video for Photography Concentrate. We're going to have a look and I'm going to give you some tips on ways to avoid taking photos that are, let's not say bad, let's say unsuccessful, where you're getting sort of lukewarm responses. I like tips on what to avoid more than bullet list of things to do. I feel there's a lot more space to experiment when you're simply avoiding a few pitfalls instead of following specific advice. So let's get started with the first tip. If you've heard this comment before, wow, that's nice, but what is it? It might be time to have a look or reevaluate either your subject or your vision of your subject. Now, what I mean by reevaluate your vision is have another look at the photo and try to pretend you didn't take it. And basically, you just came across this particular image. With that frame of mind, then ask yourself if you know what you're looking at. Now, I need to take a step back here. It goes without saying, if your original intention was to use your subject, either because of the colors or the lines or the general composition, to create something abstract, then more power to you. The key words here, though, are original intention. Now, sure, there are happy accidents when you end up by chance with a good photo, but it is incredibly important to get into the habit of having a purpose or objective when you're photographing. It's so easy to get caught up in the moment when you're photographing and forget that while you're seeing what you're photographing in context, what the subject is as a whole, the location, your viewer won't have that advantage. When your viewer has to sit there and try and figure out what they're seeing, it creates unwanted tension and frustration. They get bored and move on to another photo. Take, for example, this image. The title is Rage Roller Coaster at Adventure Island. Now, I probably would have been able to arrive at the fact that this was a roller coaster, but from the tight crop, it's a bit hard to be sure. I'm guessing that the photographer was trying to capture the motion and speed, but there are some elements here that make it difficult to understand if this is just a piece of machinery. Those round cages, this element here that looks a bit like a saw. It would have been nice to have seen the height or the actual mass of the roller coaster to feel that thrill the photographer was probably trying to capture. Here, too, is an example of the photographer getting caught up in seeing something that for them, in that particular moment, was interesting. Seeing it as a standalone photo is far less so. Now, we all have to remember that, especially in this day and age, our viewers have a very, very short attention span. We can have any type of information we need or want at our fingertips in a matter of seconds. If we have to sit and look at a photo like this, which has little in the way of good composition or interesting design or colors, we move on fairly quickly to something that is more attention-grabbing. Or this image here. I find it's a shame that you can't really appreciate what it is. From the title of the photo, I found out it was an artwork entitled Global Crises, and from there you can sort of understand the subject, but you can't fully see or recognize the elements. So remember, unless you're really trying for abstract photos, try and be objective when you're shooting, or at least when you're editing. What do all cameras have in common? A frame. Sometimes this very obvious fact can be overlooked, especially if you find yourself in a new or exciting location. Rein in your eye in the sense that your camera has a frame, and every single solitary element that you put in that frame needs to be intentional. And if not relevant to the photo or story, then at least it needs to be aesthetically valuable. Constantly ask yourself, is there anything in the frame that shouldn't be there? If you ask yourself this question enough times, it will become an automatic response for your eye every time you lift the camera to take a photo. For example, look at the rocking chair in this photo. Not only does it make the background way too busy and distracting, but since it's lined up with her top, it almost looks like it's cutting right through her. Something that I do when I'm in a new place and slightly and happily overwhelmed is to sort of treat my camera like a dog on a leash. I'll let myself run for a few minutes and start snapping photos without too much control to sort of release some energy. And then I rein in my eye and start being more disciplined. It's important to train yourself to be very aware of what's going on around the edges of the frame too. Be careful of not only what's creeping in, but what you might be inadvertently cropping out as well, such as in these photos. In these images, it seems the pose is getting all the attention and the photographer has sort of forgotten that there are other body parts that are relevant, such as the hand in this photo and the left leg of the woman in this photo. And while we're talking about things within your camera's frame, here's a bonus tip. Get out of the habit of having all those icons and settings within the frame. Whether you realize it or not, they are at best distracting and oftentimes actually cover up elements in your photo. Keep it clean and concentrate on your subject and not your settings. Unfortunately, it's often that I hear the comment from workshop students, "Oh well, I'll fix it in Photoshop." And there are mistakes that can be taken out or fixed in post-production, but depending on the skills of the user, sometimes it's too obvious that an image has been edited. In my opinion, too much post-production takes away the magic of photography and renders so many photos lifeless. In my mind, automatically relying on after-the-shoot fixes is a lot like relying on crib notes. Sure, it can probably help you increase your photo's grade from, let's say, a C to a B, but the person who will be losing out on all sorts of wonderful experiences and nuances will be you. You won't be going that extra step while you're shooting. You won't be using and developing your creative mind, and you won't be taking the time to wait and look and see what's really in front of you. Not to mention, you'll risk underwhelming your viewer. Color corrections are best when kept to a minimum too, unless you happen to be going for that otherworldly effect. That super saturated, crisp landscape with the colors that pop out starts to become a photo that says more about the work done after than about the actual subject. A rule of thumb in general is if it looks like you're going to have to spend more time in Photoshop than you did actually taking the photo, then I'd reconsider reshooting if possible. The same goes for the color. If it looks like a boring landscape or whatever it is you're shooting, then why not look for something to make it better instead of just relying on upping the contrast, the vibrance, and saturation levels? Always shooting in program mode and autofocus could be one of the biggest reasons you aren't getting the photos you want. Now, I've been shooting since college, and I can honestly say that I have never, ever shot in program mode. And I used autofocus only with Olympus cameras since their first pro digital camera, the E1, had a manual focus that was a bit quirky. Relying solely on your camera to do the heavy work of setting aperture and shutter speed is like running without stretching. You lose your flexibility over time, which leads to limited creativity, which makes for banal and oftentimes boring photos. If you rarely or haven't ever used manual mode, it does take some practice to get used to and to get to the point where you can do it quickly. Here are a couple of tips that I use that will probably help you a little bit. As I'm getting close to what I'm going to photograph, the first thing I do is set the aperture. I know that, for example, if I'm in front of a landscape, more than likely I'm going to be stopping down as much as possible. And so as I'm walking toward where I want to be, I am already moving the aperture to a higher number. Now for portraits, I'm going to probably stay somewhere in the middle, but evaluate the surroundings to see if they are important enough to play a role as part of the subject, or do I need to open the lens up considerably to render them out of focus. For the detail work that I do, I already know that I'll be shooting at f1.4. So before I even start to raise the camera, I've got the aperture already set. Now for the shutter speed, I know that if I'm outside and it's sunny, then I'll be shooting fast, even with a higher f-stop. So I'll start moving the shutter speed up as soon as I've set the aperture. Vice versa when I'm shooting indoors and shooting under low light. I use a spot meter in my camera if I'm not sure and make the adjustments accordingly. Experiment with different film speeds until you find one you like. If you stick to one ISO, as I've done all my life, then you'll see that oftentimes no adjustments are needed, or at the most, minimal setting changes. You'll become in tune with the light in any situation, and that will help you immensely when you need to set up a shot quickly. Following closely behind tip number 4 is the one piece of advice that you've probably heard before, but really stands above all else. If you're frustrated with your photos, or anything else for that matter that you're trying to learn, the guitar, a new language, growing tomatoes, anything, you know that it's all just about practice. You can't expect to see improvements if you go photograph for an hour or so every once in a while. It's practice, practice, practice. To be honest, any and all tips that I talk about, that you hear about from other people, that you see on YouTube or in classes, is all stuff that you can figure out in time if you shoot a lot and you shoot with various subjects and in changing conditions. But, and I can't stress this enough, with your camera though, not your cell phone. Cell phones have truly gotten amazing, and I was enamored, as were most people, with the ease of use and the quality of the photos. As I snapped away with my new iPhone, even though I was using it just for fun, I saw my ability to think aperture shutter speed diminish quite a bit. So, especially as you are just getting used to using manual mode, try and keep your cell phone photography to a bare minimum. In fact, challenge yourself to quit using it altogether. Something I see time and time again in my workshops. We go to these great locations and everyone is snapping away and then walking away as soon as they fired off a few frames. In the old days of film, when I worked with some of the best fashion photographers in New York City, I was there when the contact sheets came back. There were often numerous contact sheets with the same clothes, location, and model, and everyone was thrilled if, out of 36 frames, there were 3 or 4 good shots. You have to stick with your subject. Move around it. Get down on your knees or up on your toes. Walk away and then come back to it. Don't be in a rush. What would you rather have after a day of shooting? 20 mediocre photographs that leave you feeling blah, or 2 amazing photographs that take your breath away every time you look at them? Now, I know you've heard the old adage, less is more. In my opinion, that applies to photography in so many ways, and none more than your choice of equipment. For over 25 years, I've had, in theory, the same camera, a Leica rangefinder, and in practice the same lens, the 50mm Summilux 1.4. I'd spent my formative years with Olympus cameras and a wide range of lenses, but after I started narrowing down what my style was and what really inspired me to photograph, I knew that the 50mm was perfect for what I wanted to do. Now, maybe you need a wider lens for the type of photographs you do, or you need a longer one, but whatever you do, start narrowing down your choices. If you're having trouble getting the shots you want and imagine, it very well could be that you just aren't sticking to and learning your equipment. I see this a lot too. Someone taking a shot, not being happy with it, changing lenses, and then changing lenses again, and still not getting the shot they want. Help yourself out a bit and set yourself up for success by giving your brain time to really learn what things look like through one lens. As you learn that one lens, you'll see that it becomes an extension of your imagination. The line of communication between what you see and how you imagine it in a photo will become a smooth transition, and you'll feel an ease and a confidence that you've never had before when taking photographs. Not to mention, think what it would be like if all you did was pick up your camera and walk out the door. No more heavy camera bags full of stuff you don't use. You want your camera to be an extension of yourself, not an accessory. So, how about a quick recap of the 7 reasons you might be having trouble getting the kinds of images you want? The photos that give both you and your viewers something to think about, inspire to, and keep you interested in your camera and the world around you. Number 1, remember to be objective. Step out of yourself and look at your photos with new eyes. Make sure they would make sense to someone seeing them for the first time and out of context. Number 2, be aware of your framing. Don't just look at the subject, but pay attention to what's around your subject within the frame and what you could be inadvertently cropping out too. Number 3, work harder as you're photographing. You miss out on so much if you don't go that extra step. Don't just rely on adjusting things or cropping or trying to enhance a photo in post-production. Another old adage that works here is you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Number 4, start weaning yourself off of the program modes and autofocus. When you start making your own decisions in light, perspective, and focus, instead of relying on your camera, that's when the magic really happens. Number 5, practice. We all know this one, but once you start a routine of always getting out there to photograph, you'll see your work improve in leaps and bounds. Number 6, and while you're out there practicing, remember to take it slow. Don't just snap a shot and move on. If something caught your attention enough to take a picture of it, then spend some time figuring out why. Number 7, narrow down your equipment and spend time really getting to know what works for you and stop jumping from lens to lens. You'll see that the more you get to know one lens, the better it works for you and helps you express what you're seeing far more clearly. I hope these tips have at least given you some food for thought and inspire you to keep photographing and reaching for new experiences. As always, you can find me in the Mastermind Facebook group for any questions or comments. Looking forward to seeing some new work. Bye for now.